The lighthouse beam cut through the fog like a sword slashing at ghosts. Jack Miller stood at the top of the spiral staircase, watching the massive light revolve with its familiar, comforting rhythm. 3 seconds of darkness, 3 seconds of light. A pattern unchanged for over a century. But tonight, something was different. The sound came again, a low, mournful howl that seemed to rise from the very stones of the lighthouse. It wasn't the wind. Jack had lived with the song of coastal gales for months now. This was something else. Something alive. "Hello?" Jack called, his voice echoing down the metal staircase. No response came except the persistent howl, now punctuated by a scratching at the door 60 feet below. Jack's hand instinctively moved to his right thigh, searching for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. Old habits from 3 tours in Afghanistan died hard. Instead, he grabbed the heavy flashlight he kept for emergencies and began his descent, counting each step as he had done 1,000 times before. A ritual that kept the darker thoughts at bay. The Point Salvation Lighthouse was the last manually operated lighthouse on the Pacific coast, an anachronism in a world of GPS and automated systems. Just like Jack himself, a relic of another time, unsuited for civilian life but perfect for the isolation of lighthouse keeping. The Coast Guard had been desperate to find someone when the previous keeper retired. Jack had been equally desperate to escape the noise, the people, the well-intentioned questions about his limp, and the nightmares that came with closing his eyes. It had seemed like perfect symmetry. 3 months in, and the nightmares still came, but less frequently. The endless rhythm of the tides, the maintenance of the ancient machinery, and the solitude had begun to heal something inside him. Until tonight. The howling grew louder as Jack reached the bottom of the stairs. The heavy oak door that separated the lighthouse from the keeper's quarters rattled slightly with each new cry. Jack raised his flashlight, ready to defend himself if necessary, and pulled the door open. The beam illuminated a pair of reflective eyes, low to the ground. A dog, thin, soaked, and shivering, stood on the threshold. Its fur was matted with sand and seawater, and one of its front paws was held gingerly off the ground. Blood trickled from a deep gash on its side. Jack lowered his flashlight. "Where'd you come from, boy?" The dog, some kind of shepherd mix by the look of it, whined softly, its tail giving a single, hesitant wag. There was no collar, no tag, nothing to indicate an owner. "There's no one living within 5 miles of here," Jack said, as if the dog might answer. And it was true. Point Salvation was isolated even by lighthouse standards, perched on a rocky peninsula that jutted into the Pacific like a defiant fist. The nearest town, Harborview, was a 20-minute drive down a winding coastal road. The dog took a tentative step forward, then collapsed onto the stone floor, its eyes never leaving Jack's face. There was something in that gaze that Jack recognized: pain, yes, but also a wariness that came from hard experience. "All right," Jack sighed. "Let's get you cleaned up. Then we'll figure out where you belong." He scooped up the animal, surprised at how light it was. The dog tensed but didn't struggle as Jack carried it to the small bathroom of his quarters, where he kept a first aid kit. He'd had enough field medical training to know the wound needed cleaning and stitches. The dog watched him prepare with an unsettling intelligence, as if it understood exactly what was happening. "This is going to hurt," Jack warned, as he cleaned the wound. The dog flinched but remained remarkably still. "Good boy," Jack murmured, surprised at how naturally the words came. He hadn't spoken to another living creature in weeks, aside from the occasional radio check with the Coast Guard. As he worked, Jack noticed something strange buried in the dog's fur, what looked like tiny fragments of glass or crystal, catching the light and glinting like miniature versions of the lighthouse beam. He plucked one out carefully and examined it. What the hell? It wasn't glass. It was harder, almost like a diamond, but with an odd blue tint. He set it aside to finish treating the dog, who was now looking at him with what Jack could have sworn was gratitude. Once the wound was cleaned and bandaged, Jack fed the dog some canned tuna, the only suitable food he had on hand, which it devoured eagerly. You got a name? Jack asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. The animal leaned into his touch. No? Then I guess I'll call you Scout. You look like a scout to me. Scout, as if approving the name, licked Jack's hand once and then limped to the door, staring out into the darkness. It whined softly, pawing at the wood. You want back out? In this weather? Jack shook his head. Not happening, buddy. Whatever's out there can wait until morning. Scout continued to stare at the door, then turned to look at Jack with an intensity that sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. Those weren't the eyes of an ordinary stray. There was purpose there. Intelligence. And unless Jack was losing his mind from isolation, a desperate attempt to communicate. What is it? Jack asked, feeling foolish for expecting an answer. What's out there? Scout barked once, sharply, then limped back to the door, scratching more urgently. Against his better judgment, Jack grabbed his coat and flashlight. Fine. 5 minutes, then we're coming back inside. The moment Jack opened the door, Scout bolted out into the night, his injury seemingly forgotten in his urgency. Jack cursed and followed, the beam of his flashlight bouncing wildly across the rocky terrain surrounding the lighthouse. Scout, get back here. The dog had stopped at the edge of the cliff, where the peninsula dropped 40 feet to the churning ocean below. Jack approached cautiously, the wind tearing at his coat. Scout barked again, looking from Jack to something below the cliff edge. Jack shined his light downward, expecting to see nothing but waves crashing against the rocks. Instead, the beam illuminated what looked like debris, splintered wood, torn canvas, the unmistakable shape of a small boat smashed against the jagged shoreline. Jesus, Jack breathed. He swept the light along the wreckage, searching for signs of life. Hello? Is anyone down there? Only the howling wind answered. Scout whined, his eyes fixed on something Jack couldn't see. Jack knew he should call the Coast Guard immediately, but something made him hesitate. The strange crystals in Scout's fur. The dog's unusual behavior. The shipwreck on a night when no sensible sailor would be near these treacherous waters. And there was something else, something his flashlight had revealed for just a moment among the debris. A shape that didn't belong. Something that glinted with the same blue light as the crystal he'd found in Scout's fur. Scout barked again, more insistently, and Jack made a decision. He would go down to the shore and check for survivors. The tide was coming in, and by morning, any evidence and any chance of rescue would be gone. What Jack didn't realize, as he turned back toward the lighthouse to get rope and his emergency kit, was that Scout was no longer looking at the shipwreck. The dog's attention had shifted to the dark waters beyond, where something large was moving beneath the surface, something that had no business being in the Pacific waters or any waters at all. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers of light pushing through the heavy clouds. Jack hadn't slept. After retrieving his emergency gear, he had spent hours searching the rocky shore for survivors, with Scout limping determinedly alongside him. They found nothing but debris, splintered wood, torn canvas, and scattered personal effects that told the story of a small pleasure craft rather than a commercial vessel. And those blue crystals. They were everywhere among the wreckage, glinting like fallen stars against the dark rocks. Jack had collected a handful, each one identical to the fragment he'd pulled from Scout's fur. They were cool to the touch and seemed to pulse with an inner light, defying the laws of refraction as Jack understood them. What do you make of this? Jack asked Scout, who was sniffing intently at a waterlogged duffel bag Jack had just discovered wedged between two rocks. The dog whined and backed away, his hackles rising. That interesting, huh? Jack unzipped the bag cautiously. Inside were sodden clothes, a waterproof case containing a passport and wallet, and at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, a leather-bound journal. Jack pulled it out, surprised to find it mostly dry thanks to its protective covering. The passport belonged to Dr. Samuel Chin, a marine biologist from the University of Washington. Jack flipped through the journal, finding pages of meticulous notes and diagrams of marine species, some of which Jack didn't recognize. The last entry was dated just 3 days ago. Found it. After 6 months of following rumors and false leads, we've located the source. The energy signature is unmistakable. If my calculations are correct, the object is lodged somewhere in the underwater cave system near Point Salvation. Local legends about the lighthouse make more sense now. We set sail tomorrow. Weather looks questionable, but we can't wait. If Meridian gets there first. The entry ended abruptly. Jack flipped the page, but the rest was blank. He looked at Scout, who was watching him with an unsettling attentiveness. Meridian? Underwater caves? What the hell was this guy involved in? Scout barked once, sharply, then turned and began limping back toward the path leading up to the lighthouse. Jack gathered the journal, passport, and a few of the crystals, then followed, his mind racing. He needed to report the shipwreck, of course, but something about Dr. Chen's final entry made him uneasy. What if this Meridian was still out there, searching for whatever Chen had been seeking? Back in the lighthouse, Jack went through his morning duties mechanically, checking the light mechanism, logging the weather conditions, testing the radio. His hand hovered over the transmit button. Protocol demanded he report the shipwreck immediately, but something kept him from pressing it, the same instinct that had saved his life more than once in Afghanistan. Instead, he found himself poring over Chen's journal again, with Scout curled at his feet. Most entries were scientific observations, water temperatures, species counts, chemical analyses, but interspersed were references to something called the Lumina phenomenon and transphysical materialization. Technical terms that meant nothing to Jack, but clearly obsessed Chen. Then, on a page dated 2 months ago, another lighthouse keeper reported seeing the lights. That makes 7 along the Pacific coast in the past century, all reporting the same phenomenon: blue lights beneath the water, equipment malfunctions, unusual animal behavior. All dismissed as hallucinations or folklore. But there's a pattern. I'm certain of it now. Jack frowned, remembering the old stories about Point Salvation Lighthouse, mariners claiming to see strange lights leading them away from the shore, electronic equipment failing mysteriously, and the persistent rumor that more shipwrecks occurred near the lighthouse than could be explained by the treacherous coastline alone. Stories he dismissed as local superstition. A knock at the door startled him out of his thoughts. Scout leapt to his feet, growling, a sound Jack hadn't heard from him before. Jack slipped Chen's journal under a cushion and moved cautiously to the door. Checking through the peephole, a woman stood outside, dressed in Coast Guard uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression was all business. Jack opened the door. "Can I help you, Lieutenant?" "Reyes." "Lieutenant Sophia Reyes," she supplied, her eyes moving past him to scan the room behind. "I'm conducting routine checks on all navigational installations along this section of the coast. Strange time for an inspection. Usually get a radio call first." Reyes' expression didn't change. "Communications are down all along the coastline. Unusual electrical interference. We're checking manually instead." Her gaze landed on Scout, who was still growling softly. "That your dog?" "Found him last night," Jack said, deliberately vague. "Seems like he was abandoned." Reyes knelt, extending a hand toward Scout. The dog backed away, his growl intensifying. Reyes straightened, her expression unreadable. "Mind if I come in?" "Standard procedure." Jack hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." Reyes moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, checking equipment and making notes on a tablet. Jack noticed she paid particular attention to the windows facing the ocean. "You know the history of this lighthouse, Mr. Miller?" she asked suddenly. "Some of it. Built in 1891. Last manually operated lighthouse on the Pacific coast. Did you know it has the highest rate of keeper turnover of any lighthouse in the United States?" Reyes continued, still making notes. "Average stay is less than 8 months. Most cite psychological stress as the reason for leaving. Isolation does strange things to people, Jack replied, keeping his voice neutral. Indeed. Reyes paused at the window, looking out toward where the shipwreck lay hidden by the high tide. Seen anything unusual lately? Lights on the water? Strange sounds. Jack thought of the shipwreck, the crystals, and Chin's journal. Scout pressed against his leg, as if warning him. Nothing out of the ordinary, he said. Just fog and storms. Reyes studied him for a long moment. Weather's been rough. Any debris washing up on the rocks? Just the usual. Driftwood. Plastic. Nothing interesting. She nodded, apparently satisfied. Well, everything seems in order. We'll have the communications back up within 24 hours. Until then, maintain your usual logs. She handed him a card. Call this number if you notice anything unusual. Jack glanced at the card. Instead of a Coast Guard insignia, it bore a stylized M above the words Meridian Research Group. His blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. Will do, Lieutenant. After Reyes left, Jack checked the radio and found it working perfectly. No outages. No interference. He tried to reach his Coast Guard contact in Harborview, but got only static. He shut it off quickly, suddenly afraid someone might be listening. Scout whined, pawing at the door again. Yeah, I know, Jack said, retrieving Chin's journal and the crystals. She was lying, and she works for Meridian, whoever they are. Jack grabbed his coat and backpack. Whatever was happening, he knew one thing for certain: Lieutenant Reyes would be back, with reinforcements. And he needed answers before that happened. Come on, Scout, he said, opening the door. Let's go find those underwater caves. The dog barked once and trotted out, leading the way with far more energy than his injured state should have allowed. Jack followed, the blue crystals in his pocket seeming to pulse with a life of their own. The path down to the beach was treacherous, especially with the ground still slick from the night storm. Jack's bad leg ached with every step, a phantom reminder of the shrapnel still embedded too close to his spine for doctors to safely remove. But Scout moved with unexpected agility, despite his injuries from the previous night seeming to have mysteriously improved. You know where we're going, don't you? Jack said, watching as the dog paused at a fork in the trail, then confidently took the left path, one Jack had never explored during his months at the Lighthouse. The path narrowed, winding between jagged rocks until it descended to a small, secluded cove Jack hadn't known existed. The beach was barely 20 feet wide, a crescent of dark sand sheltered by towering cliffs on three sides. At the far end, partially obscured by an outcropping, was the dark mouth of a cave. Scout barked once and trotted toward it. I don't like this, Jack muttered, but he followed nonetheless. The tide was out, but he knew they had maybe 2 hours before the water would start to rise again. 2 hours to explore whatever secrets lay within the cave and get back to higher ground. As they approached the cave entrance, Jack pulled out his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam illuminated rough stone walls dripping with seawater and patches of luminescent moss. Scout patted ahead confidently, his nails clicking on the stone floor. The cave extended deeper than Jack had expected, the ceiling gradually rising until he could stand comfortably. The air grew cooler, with a strange metallic taste that reminded him of the aftermath of lightning strikes. His flashlight beam caught glimmers of blue crystals embedded in the walls, larger versions of the fragments he'd collected from the wreckage. What is this place? He whispered, his voice echoing strangely. The sound seemed to linger longer than it should, as if the cave itself was reluctant to release it. After about 50 yards, the passage widened into a circular chamber. Jack's flashlight couldn't reach the far wall, but the beam reflected off countless blue crystals embedded in the ceiling and walls, creating a dazzling display of light that reminded him of a planetarium he'd visited as a child. Scout moved to the center of the chamber and sat, his eyes fixed on Jack expectantly. This is it, isn't it? What Chin was looking for. Jack's flashlight suddenly flickered, then died. But instead of plunging the chamber into darkness, the blue crystals began to glow more intensely, pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that reminded Jack of a heartbeat. In the otherworldly light, Jack noticed a pool of water at the far side of the chamber that he hadn't seen before. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the glowing crystals like a mirror. Scout approached it cautiously, sniffing the edge. Jack followed, kneeling beside the pool. The water was clear but seemed to have an impossible depth, as if the pool extended far beyond the physical constraints of the cave. And at the very bottom, barely visible, was something large and metallic. Shin said the object was lodged in the cave system. Jack murmured, "Is that it down there?" As if in response to his voice, the water's surface rippled, though there was no breeze to disturb it. The blue light from the crystals intensified, and Jack felt a strange pressure in his ears, like descending too quickly in an airplane. Scout whined, backing away from the pool, but Jack felt drawn to it, an inexplicable compulsion to reach out and touch the water. The moment his fingers broke the surface, images flooded his mind: a lighthouse, but not Point Salvation. This one was older, its architecture unfamiliar. Inside, a keeper wound the clockwork mechanism, his clothing from another century. Outside, through the lighthouse windows, the sky was wrong. 2 moons hung low on the horizon, casting twin reflections on an alien sea. Jack jerked his hand back with a gasp. The vision vanished, but the memory of it remained vivid, impossible to dismiss as imagination. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Scout barked sharply, then froze, his ears pricked toward the cave entrance. A moment later, Jack heard it too, voices and the crunch of footsteps on stone. "Lieutenant, readings are off the chart. The energy signature is stronger than anything we've recorded. Proceed with caution. If the object is exposed, do not approach without proper containment equipment." Jack recognized Lieutenant Reyes' voice immediately. Meridian had found them. He grabbed Scout by the scruff and pulled him behind a large rock formation at the edge of the chamber, praying the pulsing blue light would provide enough cover. Flashlight beams swept the chamber as 3 figures entered. Reyes was in front, no longer in Coast Guard uniform, but wearing what looked like tactical gear with the same stylized M logo. Behind her were 2 men in similar attire, carrying equipment Jack didn't recognize. "Set up the sonic mapping array," Reyes ordered. "I want full-dimensional readings of that pool." "What about the lighthouse keeper?" one of the men asked. "Not a concern. He's an ex-Marine with PTSD. If he reports anything unusual, no one will believe him." Jack clenched his jaw, anger flaring. Scout pressed against his leg, trembling slightly, and Jack placed a calming hand on the dog's head. "Ma'am, I'm picking up an anomalous life sign," the second man said, looking at a handheld device. "Non-human, but the pattern isn't matching any known species." Reyes frowned. "The dog? No, it's inside the pool." Jack watched as one of the men approached the water's edge with an instrument that resembled a small satellite dish. As he held it over the pool, the water began to ripple more violently, and the blue light from the crystals pulsed faster, almost stroboscopic. "Energy levels are spiking," the man reported, his voice tense. "Something's happening." The surface of the pool erupted in a geyser of water, sending the Meridian operative stumbling backward. A sound filled the chamber. Not quite a roar, not quite a song, but something between the two, vibrating at a frequency that made Jack's teeth ache. From the pool emerged a creature unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It was vaguely serpentine, but with an iridescent hide that seemed to shift between physical and incorporeal states. Its head, if it could be called a head, was adorned with what looked like those same blue crystals, forming a crown-like structure around glowing eyes that held an unmistakable intelligence. Scout let out a low whine, not of fear, but of recognition. "Containment protocol," Reyes shouted, drawing a weapon that emitted a high-pitched whine as it charged. "Tranquilizers ready." The creature rose higher, water cascading from its form, and fixed its gaze on Reyes. The lieutenant froze, her weapon half raised, her expression slack as if she was seeing something beyond the confines of the cave. Then the creature turned, seeming to look directly at Jack's hiding place. Its eyes locked with his, and Jack felt the same rush of images he'd experienced when touching the water, but stronger, more coherent. The lighthouse across centuries, keepers living and dying, a connection between worlds, the creature as guardian, sentinel, watcher, and mixed in with it all, a sense of desperate urgency. "My God," one of the men whispered. "It's been here all along. This is what the lighthouse was built to." A blinding flash of blue light cut him off, and the chamber plunged into darkness and chaos. Jack came to with Scout licking his face, the dog's warm tongue persistent against his cheek. His head throbbed, and the taste of copper filled his mouth. He sat up slowly, disoriented, trying to piece together what had happened. The cave was dimly lit now, the blue crystals emitting only a faint glow. The pool was calm, its surface undisturbed, and the Meridian team was gone. "Scout," Jack whispered, checking the dog for injuries. "You okay, buddy?" Scout whined softly, nudging Jack's hand with his nose. The dog seemed unharmed, but there was something different about him now, a subtle luminescence to his eyes that caught the dim light of the crystals. Jack checked his watch and froze. It had stopped at 11:42 a.m., which was around when they'd entered the cave. But the quality of light filtering in from the entrance suggested late afternoon, not midday. Either his watch had broken, or... "How long were we out?" he muttered, pushing himself to his feet. His leg protested sharply, and he leaned against the rock wall for support. Scout led the way out of the cave, his movements sure despite the growing darkness. When they emerged onto the small beach, Jack's suspicions were confirmed. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. They'd lost nearly 6 hours. The tide had come in and gone out again while they were unconscious, evidenced by the fresh line of seaweed and debris marking high tide. Among the debris, Jack spotted something metallic, a device similar to what the Meridian operatives had been carrying. He picked it up cautiously. It was dead, its screen cracked, but the Meridian logo was clearly visible on its casing. "They left in a hurry," Jack said. "Or something made them leave." The climb back up to the lighthouse was harder than the descent had been. Jack's leg ached fiercely, and exhaustion weighed on him like a physical burden. But a growing sense of urgency pushed him forward. He needed to understand what was happening, what that creature was, why Meridian wanted it, and what it all had to do with the lighthouse. As they crested the final rise, the lighthouse came into view, its beam already cutting through the gathering dusk. But something was wrong. The keeper's quarters were lit up, shadows moving behind the curtains. "Someone's inside," Jack whispered, dropping to a crouch behind a cluster of rocks. Scout growled softly, his hackles rising. Through his years of military training, Jack assessed the situation quickly. 2 vehicles were parked near the lighthouse, a black SUV with government plates and a Coast Guard Jeep. For people minimum, based on the moving shadows. Armed, most likely. "We need another way in," he told Scout. "Need to see what we're dealing with." There was a maintenance entrance on the far side of the lighthouse, accessible only via a narrow path along the cliff edge. It was meant for repairs to the exterior of the building and wasn't on any official blueprints. Jack had discovered it by accident during his first month as keeper. They circled wide, keeping low, and using the growing darkness for cover. Scout moved like a shadow, his injured paw no longer seeming to bother him at all. The maintenance door was unlocked. As Jack had expected, it wasn't considered a security risk due to its precarious location. Inside, they climbed a narrow ladder that led to a storage room off the main staircase of the lighthouse. Jack pressed his ear to the door, listening to the voices echoing up from below. "Been keeping tabs on this lighthouse for decades," a man's voice was saying. "The readings have always been consistent, but never this strong. Something's changed." It's the keeper. Jack recognized Reyes' voice immediately. Miller. He's connected somehow. The entity responded to him. And the dog? Not a dog. At least, not entirely. We've seen this before. The entity creates proxies, physical manifestations that can move between the worlds. The dog is one of them. Jack glanced at Scout, who returned his gaze steadily. Those intelligent eyes suddenly made more sense. Not just a stray, but something else, a messenger, a guide. What exactly happened down there? Lieutenant, a new voice asked. Heavy with authority, the entity revealed itself earlier than anticipated. We weren't prepared for a direct encounter. Reyes sounded defensive. It initiated contact with Miller before we could secure the area. Then we need Miller. The entity has chosen him as its focal point. Without him, we can't stabilize the gateway. He'll be back, Reyes assured them. Everything he values is here. His quarters, his post. Duty is hardwired into military types like him. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough. He needed to get out, regroup, and figure out what to do next. But as he turned to leave, Scout wasn't behind him anymore. The dog had somehow slipped past him and was now descending the spiral staircase toward the voices. Scout, Jack hissed, but it was too late. A commotion erupted below, shouts of surprise, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, and then Scout's bark, loud and defiant. The proxy, someone shouted. Secure it. Jack made a split-second decision. If they captured Scout, they'd use him as bait. He couldn't let that happen. He drew a deep breath, then burst through the door and down the stairs, taking them two at a time despite his bad leg. The scene in the keeper's quarters was chaos. For people, Reyes, two Meridian operatives, and an older man in a suit, were attempting to corner Scout, who was darting between them with uncanny agility. As Jack entered, Scout broke through their circle and raced to his side. Miller. Reyes recovered first, straightening and reaching for her weapon. Stand down. We just want to talk. Armed personnel in my lighthouse suggests otherwise, Lieutenant. Jack replied, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He subtly positioned himself between Scout and the others. The older man stepped forward, his expression carefully composed. Mr. Miller, I'm Dr. Warren Hayes, Director of Special Projects for Meridian Research. We believe you've experienced contact with an entity of extreme scientific importance. You mean the thing in the cave? The one your team was trying to capture? Hayes' eyes narrowed slightly at Jack's knowledge. That entity is part of something much larger than you can imagine. It's been here for centuries, possibly millennia, using the lighthouse as a focal point between worlds. Worlds, Jack repeated flatly, as in plural. The blue crystals are a physical manifestation of the boundary between dimensions, Hayes continued. The entity you saw is a guardian of that boundary. And now, for reasons we don't fully understand, it's chosen to connect with you. Scout pressed against Jack's leg, and a strange sensation passed through him. A feeling of certainty that Hayes was telling the truth, or at least part of it. Why me? Jack asked. Lighthouse keepers have always been conduits, Reyes interjected. Something about the isolation, the vigilance, the dedication to keeping the light burning. It resonates with the entity's purpose. Hayes nodded. We need your help, Mr. Miller. The entity is becoming more active, more visible. If we don't stabilize the boundary, the consequences could be severe. Jack looked down at Scout, who met his gaze with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. In that moment, Jack knew he was facing a choice that would alter not just his life, but potentially the fabric of reality itself. Tell me about Chin, Jack said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the room. The marine biologist whose boat wrecked on the rocks. Hayes and Reyes exchanged glances. Dr. Chin was a former Meridian researcher, Hayes admitted. He became obsessed with the entity, convinced it was trying to communicate a warning. When we restricted his access, he went rogue. A warning about what? That's not relevant to our current. It's relevant to me, Jack interrupted, his voice hard. If you want my help, I need the truth. All of it. Hayes sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief, a gesture that seemed calculated to buy time. The boundary between worlds has been thinning for decades. The entity maintains the stability of the passage, but something is weakening its ability to do so. Something or someone? Jack pressed. We believe another force is attempting to widen the breach, Reyes said, ignoring a warning look from Hayes. A force from the other side. If it succeeds, both worlds could collapse into each other. Scout growled softly, and Jack felt a strange vibration through the floor beneath his feet, subtle but unmistakable. It's happening now, isn't it? Jack asked. That's why you're all here. Hayes nodded grimly. The event is accelerating. We have hours, maybe less. Jack considered his options. He didn't trust Meridian. Their aggressive tactics in the cave had made that clear. But if what they were saying was true, the stakes were impossibly high. What do you need me to do? Return to the cave with us, Hayes said. The entity responds to you. With the right equipment, we can use that connection to stabilize the boundary. Jack looked down at Scout, who stared back with those intelligent, otherworldly eyes. The dog, or whatever Scout truly was, had saved his life, led him to the cave, shown him the truth. There was a bond there that transcended explanation. If I help you, Jack said slowly, I want your guarantee that the entity won't be harmed. No containment, no experiments. You stabilize the boundary and then you leave it in peace. Hayes hesitated, but Reyes answered firmly. Agreed. And one more thing, Jack added. What happens to Scout after this is over? Hayes shifted uncomfortably. The proxy will likely dissipate once the boundary is stabilized. These manifestations aren't permanent. They're projections, anchored to our reality through the entity's will. Jack felt a pang of loss at the thought. In just 2 days, Scout had become more than just a companion. He'd become a guide, a protector. The idea of losing him felt like losing a part of himself. Scout whined softly and nudged Jack's hand with his nose, as if understanding his thoughts. Let me grab a few things, Jack said, moving to his desk while keeping a wary eye on the Meridian team. From the bottom drawer, he retrieved a small military-issue survival kit and, hidden beneath it, his service pistol. He tucked the gun into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, covered by his jacket. Hayes noticed but didn't comment. We should move quickly, Reyes urged, checking her watch. The tidal window is closing. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying a strange electric charge that made the hair on Jack's arms stand on end. The lighthouse beam seemed dimmer somehow, struggling against a darkness that felt deeper than night. The descent of the cave was tense. Jack led the way with Scout by his side, followed by Hayes, Reyes, and the 2 Meridian operatives carrying equipment cases. No one spoke. The only sounds their footsteps on the rocky path and the increasingly angry surge of the waves below. As they approached the cave entrance, Jack noticed something unsettling. The tide was rising much faster than it should have been, considering the moon phase. The beach was already half submerged, the water reaching places it shouldn't have for hours yet. Time's distorting, Reyes murmured, noticing his confusion. It's a side effect of the weakening boundary. That's why you lost those hours in the cave earlier. Inside, the cave felt different, the air thicker, more charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The blue crystals pulsed with an irregular rhythm, faster and more frantic than before. The pool at the chamber's center was no longer still, but churning like a whirlpool, occasional flashes of blue light erupting from its depths. Set up the stabilizers, Hayes ordered, his voice tight with tension. Gamma configuration. The operatives moved quickly, placing tripod-mounted devices around the pool. Each one housed a crystal similar to those embedded in the cave walls, but these were cut and polished, their surfaces inscribed with intricate patterns. What now? Jack asked, watching as Reyes calibrated one of the devices. "Now we need you to call the entity," Hayes said. "The connection has already been established. You just need to focus on it. Make contact again." Jack approached the edge of the pool, Scout at his heels. The churning water reflected fractured images, the cave, the crystals, faces Jack didn't recognize from places he'd never been. He knelt, uncertain. "How exactly am I supposed to do this?" "The same way you did before," Hayes replied. "Touch the water." Jack hesitated, remembering the flood of images that had overwhelmed him last time. Scout nudged his hand encouragingly. "Trust the dog, Miller," Reyes said quietly. "It's the entity's proxy, it won't lead you astray." Jack took a deep breath and plunged his hand into the water. The same rush of images came, but this time they were sharper, more coherent. The lighthouse across centuries, keepers maintaining the light, the entity guarding the passage between worlds. But there was something new too, a darkness seeping through, a wrongness that made Jack's skin crawl. "Something's coming through," he gasped, unable to pull his hand free. "Something that doesn't belong here." The pool erupted, sending Jack tumbling backward. Water sprayed across the chamber, but instead of falling naturally, it hung suspended in the air, forming intricate, impossible patterns before slowly retreating back to the pool. From the churning depths emerged the serpentine creature Jack had seen before. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, visible only as a distortion in the air, was something massive and dark, a presence that seemed to bend the light around it, its edges indistinct, but its malevolence unmistakable. "Activate the stabilizers," Hayes shouted, backing away from the pool. The Meridian operatives rushed to comply, but one of the devices sparked and failed, smoke curling from its circuitry. "It's not working," Reyes yelled. "The interference is too strong." The serpentine entity rose higher, its crystal crown glowing with intensifying blue light as it positioned itself between the dark presence and the cave entrance, a guardian facing down an intruder. Scout barked sharply and raced to the failed stabilizer. To Jack's amazement, the dog touched his nose to the device, and the crystal inside began to glow again. "Miller," Hayes called, "the entity is trying to help us. It needs your connection to amplify the barrier." Jack didn't understand the science, but he understood duty. He protected boundaries before, held the line against enemies, maintained his post despite the cost. This was no different, except the stakes were infinitely higher. Jack moved without hesitation toward the pool where the serpentine entity hovered, its crystalline form shimmering between states of matter. Behind it, the dark presence pushed against an invisible barrier, creating ripples in reality that distorted Jack's vision and made his ears pop. "What do I do?" he called to Hayes. "Physical contact. The stabilizers need a focal point, and you're it." Jack waded into the churning pool, the water feeling thicker than it should, almost viscous. Scout barked frantically from the edge, but didn't follow. The temperature dropped with each step, until Jack's breath clouded before his face despite the cave's earlier warmth. As the water reached his waist, the serpentine entity turned toward him. Up close, Jack could see that what he'd taken for a head was more like a nexus of energy, the blue crystals orbiting around it in a complex dance. The entity lowered this nexus until it was level with Jack's face. "I'm here to help," Jack said, unsure if the entity could understand words, but certain it could sense intent. "Tell me what to do." In response, the entity extended what might have been a limb, a tendril of light and matter that moved with purpose. Jack understood and reached out his hand. The moment they touched, the world fell away. Jack found himself standing in a vast, impossible space, a sky of midnight blue stretching in all directions, punctuated by structures that resembled lighthouses but built with geometries that defied human architecture. Some floated upside down, others sideways, their beams intersecting to form a complex lattice of light that seemed to hold the very fabric of reality together. And he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man in the uniform of a 19th century lighthouse keeper, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes carrying the weight of decades. "You're the new keeper," the man said, his voice echoing strangely. "I'm just filling in," Jack replied automatically. "Temporary assignment." The old keeper laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "That's what I said, too. Ended up staying 43 years. He gestured at the network of lighthouse beams. "This is what we maintain, you and I. Not just a light for ships, a beacon between worlds, a navigation point in the dark spaces where realities touch." "I don't understand." "You will. The entity chose you for a reason. You've lived between worlds before, between war and peace, between life and death. You understand liminality." Jack followed the keeper's gaze to one of the lighthouses, its beam flickering erratically. "Point Salvation," the old man confirmed. "Your post. The boundary is failing there because the shadow has found a weakness." "The shadow? That's what we call it. An entity like the Guardian, but corrupted, hungry. It feeds on the energy of crossing, grows stronger each time something passes between worlds. For centuries, the Guardian has kept it at bay, but the shadow has grown too powerful. How do I stop it?" The old keeper turned to Jack, his expression grave. "You understand what a lighthouse does, yes? It doesn't stop the storm, it guides ships safely through it." "A path," Jack murmured, the understanding crystallizing. "The Guardian doesn't need to destroy the shadow, it needs a safe channel for it." "Precisely. The Guardian cannot leave its post, but you can become the conduit, the bridge that directs the crossing." The old keeper placed a weathered hand on Jack's shoulder. "But there is a cost. To hold open a passage between worlds requires an anchor in both." "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the impossible space around them. "I'd have to stay. Become like you." The keeper nodded solemnly. "Not an easy choice. Not one I would ask of anyone lightly. But you've been searching for purpose since you came back from war. Perhaps this is where you were meant to be all along." Before Jack could respond, the space around them shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the fabric of the void, darkness seeping through like ink through paper. "It's breaking through," the keeper warned. "You must decide quickly." The void dissolved and Jack was back in the cave, still standing waist-deep in the churning pool. The Serpentine Guardian was engaged in a silent battle with the shadow, their forms intertwining in a deadly dance. The stabilizers were all active now, their crystals pulsing in harmony, but the shadow continued to push forward, reality bending around its presence. Scout barked frantically from the edge of the pool, then turned and raced toward the cave entrance. "The dog's running," one of the Meridian operatives shouted. "Let it go," Hayes ordered. "Focus on the stabilizers." But Jack understood. Scout wasn't abandoning them, he was leading the way. "The lighthouse," Jack called out. "We need to get to the lighthouse." Hayes stared at him in confusion, but Reyes understood immediately. "The light. It's the focal point of the boundary." She grabbed a portable stabilizer. "Move, now." As if in response, the Serpentine Guardian extended another tendril toward Jack. This time, when he touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with strength. He waded out of the pool and sprinted for the exit, his leg no longer aching, his movements charged with borrowed power. The journey back to the lighthouse was a blur. The storm had intensified, rain lashing horizontally and waves crashing against the rocks below. Scout ran ahead, his white form barely visible through the deluge. Behind them, Hayes, Reyes, and the operatives struggled to keep up, burdened by their equipment. The lighthouse beam seemed to be fighting the darkness, its rotation irregular, the light dimming with each sweep. Jack burst through the entrance and took the spiral stairs two at a time, Scout somehow already ahead of him, waiting at each landing as if urging him on. At the top, in the lantern room, Jack finally understood the keeper's words. The giant Fresnel lens that focused the light was vibrating, its segments out of alignment. But more importantly, the space around it seemed thin, transparent, as if reality itself was wearing away, revealing glimpses of that impossible void with its network of lighthouse beams. Reyes staggered into the lantern room moments later, her face pale. "The stabilizers aren't enough," she gasped. "The breach is too wide." "I know what to do," Jack said with sudden certainty. He approached the light mechanism, placed his hands on the brass housing, and felt it resonate with the same energy that had flowed from the Guardian. "Miller, what are you doing?" Hayes demanded, arriving with his operatives. "My job," Jack replied simply. "I'm the keeper." With that, he closed his eyes and opened himself to the energy flowing through the lighthouse. A shockwave of blue light erupted from the lens, knocking everyone except Jack backward. Scout remained standing, his form now shimmering with the same light that pulsed through the crystals. The shadow that had been pursuing them materialized in the center of the lantern room, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to absorb both light and sound. It lunged toward the lens, but Jack stood firm, channeling the Guardian's energy through his body and into the light mechanism. "A path," he whispered, remembering the Keeper's words. "Not a barrier, a path." The lighthouse beam intensified, piercing the shadow. But instead of destroying it, the light created a tunnel, a controlled passage. The shadow hesitated, then flowed into the beam, following it outward, not into our world, but into the space between worlds, guided by the light to a place where it could exist without harm. The entire lighthouse shuddered, the glass panes of the lantern room rattling in their frames. The lens rotated faster, its light no longer white but a brilliant blue that cut through the storm with impossible clarity. For a moment, the beam seemed to connect with others, those impossible lighthouses Jack had seen in the void, creating a network of light that spanned beyond human comprehension. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The lens slowed to its normal rotation, the light faded back to its standard warm glow, and the presence of the shadow was gone, leaving only a residual chill in the air. Jack released the mechanism, his legs giving out beneath him as the borrowed strength left his body. Scout was at his side instantly, supporting him with surprising strength for a medium-sized dog. "You did it," Reyes whispered, her scientific detachment cracking to reveal genuine awe. "You stabilized the boundary." Hayes approached more cautiously, his gaze shifting between Jack and the lens. "The readings are normalizing," he confirmed, checking a handheld device. "The breach is sealed." Jack stroked Scout's head, feeling the warmth beneath his fur. "Not sealed," he corrected. "Channeled. There's a difference." Outside, the storm was subsiding, the clouds parting to reveal a night sky brilliant with stars. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if an invisible toxin had been purged from the atmosphere. "What happens now?" Jack asked, looking directly at Hayes. The director hesitated. "We monitor the situation. Make sure the boundary remains stable." "And the Guardian?" "The entity in the cave will be left in peace, as agreed," Reyes interjected, giving Hayes a pointed look. "We've learned our lesson about interference." Jack nodded, then looked down at Scout, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. "And Scout," Hayes sighed. "As I explained earlier, proxies are temporary manifestations. Now that the crisis has passed, it will likely dissipate within days." But even as Hayes spoke, Jack noticed something strange. Scout's form was becoming more solid, more permanent. The faint blue glow that had surrounded him was fading, replaced by the ordinary warmth of a living creature. The dog barked once, tail wagging, and Jack understood. "I think you're wrong," Jack said. "I think Scout's staying." A week later, Jack stood on the lighthouse gallery, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in hues of gold and crimson. Scout lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, his coat now completely normal. No blue glow, no crystalline fragments, just an ordinary dog with extraordinarily intelligent eyes. Meridian had departed days ago, taking their equipment and leaving only a satellite phone with instructions to call if anything unusual occurred. Reyes had been the last to leave, pausing at the helicopter to give Scout a respectful nod. "You know what's strange?" she'd said to Jack. "In all our research, this is the first time we've seen a proxy become permanent. It's almost as if the Guardian wants to keep an eye on you." Jack had smiled. "Or maybe it just knows I need the company." Now, as the sun slipped below the horizon, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since before Afghanistan. The lighthouse still held secrets. He could feel them in the vibration of the stones, see them in the occasional shimmer of reality around the beam on certain nights, but they were secrets he was now part of, mysteries he was chosen to protect. "Beautiful evening," he told Scout, who thumped his tail in agreement. Jack smiled and turned back to the spiral staircase. It was almost time for the light's first rotation of the night. The keeper's work was never done, especially at the last lighthouse, the one that stood guard not just over ships, but over the very fabric of reality itself.